The city of Philadelphia is in the middle of its district attorney election process. It comes at a time when many in Philly and around the country are calling for a fundamental overhaul of the criminal justice system. Larry Krasner is Philadelphia's current district attorney. The Democrat easily defeated his primary challenger, Carlos Vega, last week. Krasner has also won the endorsements of prominent progressive lawmakers like Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. Yet, despite his overwhelming primary win and promise to bring about change, homicides in Philly have been trending in the wrong direction. According to the Philadelphia Police Department, each of the last 5 years has seen a rise in murders in the city of brotherly love. In fact, homicides are up 43% in 2021 compared to the same time last year. Some critics have blamed Krasner's progressive policies for the increase. For more, I am joined by Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner himself. District Attorney Krasner, welcome. It's great to have you with us. First off, if you would, can you respond to those who are arguing that your progressive policies are to blame for the rise in crime on the streets of Philly?
I can, but I think the voters really already have. You know, we just won the primary in a city where 7 out of 8 votes are Democratic votes. And we not only got more than 2 out of every 3 votes against an opponent making exactly that argument, but we got those votes primarily from exactly the places most affected by gun violence. These are neighborhoods where Black people and brown people and poor people live. And in many of those neighborhoods, we took 80 or 90% of the vote because they're not buying the nonsense. They know the truth. The truth is that homicides have been on the way up in Philly for the last 7 years. I've been the DA for 3. So that theory doesn't work out too well. And if we look nationally, what we see is that the increase in homicides last year in Philadelphia was actually slightly less than the increase in homicides in the 50 biggest cities in the United States. We had a 40% increase last year. In the 50 biggest cities, it was a 42% increase. So what's really going on is you have conservative people who don't like criminal justice reform trying to weaponize a national tragedy, which is a spike in gun violence in basically the entire country, but especially in the biggest cities in the United States. They're trying to blame progressive prosecutors for it when there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever to support that. It has been studied. There are many, many cities with more traditional prosecutors that have much, much higher rates of a spike in gun violence that is the result of the pandemic.
Right. Well, that is true. There is a spike all around the country that has been tied, to the pandemic. Even so, what is your plan? What are the tangible things that you plan to enact to bring crime down?
So what we have to do is we have to invest in prevention. As with anything else, if we're going to fix it, we should know the problem. So let us look around. I'm 60 years old. I've never lived in a world where all organized sports in and out of school were shut down. I've never lived in a world where high school classrooms were closed for a year, summer camps closed, job programs closed, rec centers closed, swimming pools closed, even normal things that young people like to do. And it is young people killing young people, like going to movie theaters, going to restaurants, closed. We have seen crime actually go down during this pandemic. We've even seen violent crime as a category that includes things like rape and gunpoint robbery. We've seen that go down, but we see this sharp spike all over the country in shootings. And there's little question that what happened here is a layer of prevention that protects us and protects our youth from this kind of behavior was stripped away completely, and the results were devastating. So the solution is we don't just restore the funding that was in prevention. We need to double down on it. We need to invest more heavily in it now that we can see how powerful and how important it is to prevent crime.
All right, so now let's talk about police reform, national police reform, because as you know, that is something that a lot of people are pushing for, but Congress missed a deadline this week to pass a police reform bill. What do you ideally want this legislation to look like if and when it materializes?
So, the feds have a role to play, but we should not overstate it. The fact is that 93% of criminal cases are decided at the state and local level. The feds only decide 7%. So it is not necessarily the case that the feds can wave a wand and solve anything. The really significant and important changes in this country have happened at the level of culture. And when you have cultural shifts as important as the circumstances around George Floyd, and then the protests that came after that, and the shift in polling that we were able to see nationally, the desire for police accountability that wasn't there before. We see the ingredients of real and permanent change in the United States reflected in federal laws, reflected in state laws, reflected in the attitudes of juries who are going to hear trials. You know, my office, for example, has been very serious about police accountability. We've charged 2 different on-duty police officers with homicide in cases where they shot to death men who were unarmed at the time that they were shot. That never happened in Philly before. But you're not going to get anywhere unless you have some judges and you have some people on the jury who are on board with that. So I see real growth and I see real progress here. I do believe that what happened with the George Floyd case and the potency of that particular video, painful though it is to watch, I think that those are so compelling that they are part of a national movement and that it is going to improve things.
And let's talk gun reform for a moment. President Biden is again calling for it after yesterday's deadly shooting in San Jose, California, yet another mass shooting. In Philadelphia, it's relatively easy to access a gun right now, and in the state of Pennsylvania. A person doesn't even need a permit to buy a gun, nor to carry one openly. So, you know, in your opinion, what needs to change, and what would you implement?
Well, what needs to change is the people in control of our state legislature, because they are completely reckless and irresponsible when it comes to reasonable regulation of guns. We have a Democratic state with a Republican-controlled legislature that, as we speak, is trying to come up with even more ability for people to carry guns openly and in public in the state, while it's punctuated by one headline after another about mass shootings. We got to get these people out of office. I mean, that's really the lesson here, and it's an encouraging lesson in light of what happened with my primary election about 10 days ago. We saw huge numbers of unexpected voters coming out this time because they believe in criminal justice reform, and part of that reform has to be reasonable gun regulation. If we look to Chicago and the problems with shootings there, those guns come through Indiana, a state that is reckless with its gun policy. We look to Jersey and New York, well, their guns come through Pennsylvania, a state that is reckless with its gun policy. We have to be serious about clamping down on, with proper regulation of guns. We regulate cars, we can regulate guns too. And we also have to be sensible about the reality that we have a country where there are more guns than people. And if we do not invest in our public schools, mental health services, community rec centers, everything I mentioned earlier, if we don't invest in young people so that they are less desperate, they are less fearful, they're less certain that they're going to die young and never have a future, if we don't invest in them, they're going to keep picking up guns. So once again, a lot of this comes back to prevention and our need to invest in it in a way this country used to do.
Well, Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner, thank you so much for joining us. We certainly appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. It was great to talk.